Please, someone, help! The voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the howling wind. 25-year-old nursing student Claire Whitmore froze mid-step, her worn textbook clutched against her chest. Snow whirled around her like restless ghosts as she turned toward the alley between the brick buildings. There, slumped against the cold wall, sat an elderly man. His silver hair was dusted with snow, his weathered hand pressed against his temple, where blood trickled down, darkening his collar. Claire's clinical shift at Memorial Hospital started in 20 minutes. Missing it meant failing her practicum. 6 months of sleepless nights, of choosing between textbooks and meals, of proving she belonged in a world that never seemed to make space for the quiet ones like her. All of it hung in the balance. But then the man looked up at her. His eyes held such profound exhaustion, such resigned loneliness, that Claire felt something crack open in her chest. She knelt beside him, her knees pressing into the frozen pavement. "Sir, I'm here. You're not alone." "My son," the man whispered, his breath forming small clouds. "I called him. He said he was too busy." Claire's hands were already moving, pulling supplies from her backpack, gauze she'd bought with grocery money, antiseptic wipes, her one good scarf. "Let me see," she said softly, her usual shyness dissolving into purpose. His name was Edward Morrison, and he'd slipped on ice walking to the pharmacy. The gash above his eyebrow wasn't deep, but at 65, in this cold, it was dangerous. As Claire cleaned and bandaged the wound with careful precision, Edward began to talk. He spoke of a son who'd built an empire but forgotten his father, of phone calls that went unanswered, of birthdays celebrated alone. His voice carried no bitterness, only a tired acceptance that broke Claire's heart more than anger ever could. "You remind me of someone," Edward said, studying her face as she worked. "My late wife, Margaret. She used to stop for every hurt bird, every lost soul. Said kindness wasn't about having time, it was about making it matter." Claire's hands trembled slightly. Her own mother had said something similar before she passed, leaving Claire to navigate nursing school alone, always afraid of taking up too much space, of being too much trouble. "Your son," Claire began hesitantly, securing the bandage. "Maybe he doesn't understand how much you need him." "Or maybe I raised him to not need anyone," Edward replied with sad wisdom. "Success has a way of teaching people the wrong lessons." By the time Claire helped Edward into a taxi and paid the fare with money meant for dinner, she'd missed her shift entirely. Her phone buzzed with messages from her clinical instructor. "Unexcused absence, see me Monday." That night, Claire sat in her tiny apartment, staring at those words, wondering if one moment of kindness had just cost her everything. The next morning, Claire arrived at the nursing school's administrative office to face consequences. But instead of her instructor, she found a man in an expensive charcoal suit standing by the window. Tall, sharp-featured, radiating the kind of cold authority that made the air feel thinner. His name was Nathan Morrison, and his voice carried the edge of someone used to being obeyed. "You're Claire Whitmore." It wasn't a question. Yes, she managed, her natural shyness returning like a familiar weight. "You abandoned your professional responsibilities yesterday." His gray eyes were like winter steel. "Do you understand the seriousness of that?" Claire's throat tightened. "I'm sorry, but there was a man who needed." "My father." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Edward Morrison. He called me yesterday. I told him I'd send someone. I had a board meeting that would determine hundreds of jobs. I made the logical choice. He was bleeding, alone, afraid." Claire's voice was barely above a whisper, but something in it made Nathan's expression flicker. "And you, a student with everything to lose, stopped." He stepped closer, and Claire saw something unsettling in his face. Not anger, but confusion, as if she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten. "Why?" "Because," Claire's words caught, then released, "because being busy isn't the same as being alive. And your father, he looked like someone who'd been waiting a long time for someone to see him. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Nathan Morrison had built Morrison Technologies from nothing, sacrificing relationships, time, and softness to reach the top. His father's calls had become background noise, easily dismissed between contracts and conquests. Yesterday, when his assistant handed him the message that his father had fallen, Nathan had done the calculation he always did: delegate, optimize, move forward. But then, Claire Whitmore had appeared in his father's life like an act of grace he didn't understand. Last night, Edward had called Nathan again, not angry, but different. "A young woman saved me today, Nathan. She had somewhere important to be, but she chose me instead. When was the last time you chose a person over a plan?" Those words had haunted Nathan through a sleepless night. And now, looking at this quiet nursing student with kind eyes and worn shoes, he felt something he'd thought he'd erased: shame. "My father asked me to find you," Nathan said, his voice softer now. "Not to punish you, to thank you. And to give you this." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a check that made Claire's breath stop. Enough to cover her entire remaining tuition. "I can't," she whispered. "You can, you will." Nathan's mask cracked further. "Claire, when you sat with my father yesterday, he told you about my mother, didn't he?" She nodded. "She died when I was 23. Before that, she made me promise to look after him. I broke that promise every day for 10 years, telling myself I was building something that mattered." His voice roughened. "You showed me what actually matters. You showed me what I've become." "Mr. Morrison." "Nathan," he corrected gently. "And I have a question for you, not as a CEO, but as a son who's forgotten how to be human. Will you help me learn again?" Over the following weeks, something unexpected unfolded. Nathan began meeting his father for Sunday dinners, awkward at first, filled with silences heavy with lost years. But slowly, something rekindled, and Claire, invited by Edward himself, became part of a strange healing constellation. She taught Nathan what she'd learned from her late mother: that presence was a gift, that listening was a skill, that kindness wasn't weakness, but the bravest thing humans could offer each other. Nathan ensured Claire's clinical instructor understood the circumstances of her absence. He established a scholarship at her school for students who demonstrated compassion beyond curriculum. And slowly, painfully, he began making space in his life for things that couldn't be measured in profits or productivity. One Sunday evening, as snow fell again outside Edward's apartment, the three of them sat together, soup steaming, conversation flowing with the ease of people who'd learned to be present. "Claire," Edward said suddenly, his eyes bright, "I want to tell you something. That day you stopped for me, you didn't just bandage a wound. You reminded an old man that he still mattered. And you reminded my son that success means nothing if you succeed alone."
Nathan met Claire's eyes across the table, and she saw gratitude there, but more than that, transformation. The hard edges had softened. The constant urgency had given way to moments of stillness. "You changed us," Nathan said quietly. "Both of us, and I'm only beginning to understand the gift you gave when you chose to stop." Claire felt tears blur her vision. I couldn't walk past someone who needed help." "That's not just anything," Edward said, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "That's everything. Margaret always said the world isn't changed by grand gestures, but by ordinary people making extraordinary choices in small moments. You proved her right." 6 months later, Claire graduated top of her nursing class. In the audience sat Edward and Nathan Morrison, clapping louder than anyone else. She'd accepted a position at Memorial Hospital's emergency department, a place where her gift for seeing people, truly seeing them, would matter most. As she walked across the stage, Claire thought of that snowy afternoon when everything had hung in the balance. How terrified she'd been, how certain she'd made the wrong choice. But standing there now, diploma in hand, she understood. The moments that change our lives aren't always the ones we plan for. Sometimes they're the moments we choose kindness when everything else tells us to keep walking. After the ceremony, Edward pulled her aside, his bandage long healed, but his gratitude undimmed. "Claire, thank you for seeing an invisible man on a cold day, for teaching my son that wealth means nothing without heart, for reminding us both that we're never too lost to find our way home." She hugged him tightly, this man who'd become like family. "Thank you for letting me be part of yours." Later, as snow began to fall again, softer this time, gentler, Claire stood outside the hospital where her career would begin. She thought of her mother, of Edward, of the power in simply stopping when someone needs you to stop. "Please, someone, help!" That desperate whisper had led her here, had taught her that the bravest thing we can do is choose each other over convenience. That in a world rushing forward, sometimes love looks like kneeling down beside someone who's fallen. And maybe that's what kindness really is, not grand sacrifice, but the sacred choice to say, "You matter, I see you, I'm here." Because in the end, we're all just walking through snow, hoping someone will stop if we fall. And the most beautiful thing we can do is be that someone for another soul. In the end, kindness isn't measured by what we sacrifice, but by whom we choose to see. In our busiest moments, let us remember, the most important meetings are the ones with hearts that need us.
If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.